Welcome to Wooden Pulpit Media's YouTube presentation of the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre, Part 3, The Killing of Coligny. Admiral Gaspard de Coligny was a well-known leader, and perhaps the biggest leader of the Huguenot cause, politically for sure, and was known as a devout Reformed believer. He had led them in military wins, helped establish the current peace of Saint-Germain that they were living under now, and was a guest at the wedding and even a part of the bridal party. He was standing up for young 18-year-old Henry of Navarre, who would have been the next biggest political leader during his marriage to the Princess Marguerite. However, he wrote while there during this time of celebration, as weddings were not just a one-day affair then, they lasted with 3 or 4 days of revelry afterwards, especially when it was being thrown by the royal family. He wrote to his wife, "If I thought of nothing but my own happiness, I would rather come to see you than to be at this court, for many reasons which I will tell you. But one must look after the people before one looks after oneself." He wrote that to his new bride, and who was at home and not at Paris with their young child, because he was there in Paris to get meetings with the king. It had been some time since the Huguenots were actually allowed at court and to be able to discuss politics with the king, and he surely had some of the violations of the peace that were going on, where worship was not allowed, on his mind to discuss. And he also wanted to discuss military help for the Reformed Church and the believers suffering in the Low Countries of the Spanish Netherlands, what we would call Belgium today. They were under great persecution by King Philip II of Spain. They were suffering under the Inquisition, and he was desirous of seeing them relieved and helped, even militarily, if need be. The French had always hated Spain, and he was hoping that they might take this opportunity to aid those who believed as he did. What happens next is a matter of debate. Who knows when and where this plan exactly is hatched? Weeks beforehand, Queen Catherine has met with the mother of Duke Henry of Guise, the widow of the murdered Duke Francois of Guise, and has allowed them back at court, which is suspicious because they had been sort of banned and not welcome at court because of Duke of Guise's power plays, and he was a power-hungry man. They did not get along with the royal family. And this visit from Catherine to the mother was very suspect. We also know that she meets on August 21st, that night, with Duke Henry of Guise, along with her son, Prince Henry. Who is not at that meeting is King Charles the Ninth. What did he know and when did he know? We're not sure. Charles had called in soldiers with guns and stationed them around the city a few days before because he didn't trust the Duke of Guise, according to what he said, but perhaps he was setting the plan in motion because he was already in on it. That part we don't know. But we do know that the plan is hatched and is carried out as an assassin is in the building by the morning of Friday the 22nd of August 1572. And he is waiting for the Admiral to go back to his hotel. The Admiral had tried to meet with the king one last time before he was going to go home. There had been a planned council meeting of which he was invited and a member to take place at 9 in the morning of Friday, August 22nd. But Charles does not appear at this council meeting, oversleeps. If you believe Charles's reign of events, he was allowed to oversleep, and the Queen Mother and Prince Henry didn't wake him so that he wouldn't make the meeting, so that Prince Henry would sit in and be a stand-in for the king, who was firmly opposed to anything the admiral would plan. If you don't, then if you don't believe Charles, then maybe this is part of the idea. When the meeting breaks up, the admiral understands now he'll never get to have that meeting and that military hope is done for. The relief for the people in Belgium is not going to appear, and he goes back to his hotel, ready to pack his things and leave. But on his way back, he is shot. The picture here on the left side is a man shooting from a window at the admiral. The right side depicts his actual murder later. The shot does not hit its mark. At the last moment, the Duke leans over to pick something off his boot, and the bullet takes off fingers of his hand and lodges in his shoulder and damages his elbow, depending on which account you read, whether it's the shoulder or the elbow. And while those with him take a moment to make sure that the admiral's okay, the admiral's able to point out where the shot comes from, and they launch over into the barn, but the assassin has immediately jumped on a horse and sped off. The barn that he was a part of, this building that he was in, was owned by the Duke of Guise. But the admiral lived. The next day, some Huguenot nobles flee the city. They fear trouble. Others go to the king, and he assures them that justice will be done. Duke Henry of Guise has presented himself to the king and said, "I didn't do it." And the king tells him, "Don't leave town." King Charles swears that he will find this villain and locks down the town and the gates to the city so that the assassin may not escape. He and Queen Catherine personally go to visit the admiral. He's also sent his personal physician, who, by the way, was a Huguenot, to go make sure the admiral was okay. The fingers had to be amputated, but Coligny would live. Charles speaks with the admiral, and no one is within earshot. What was said, no one actually knows, but witnesses describe the king as being moved and the Queen Mother worried. And when he was done, the king seemed determined to find the murderer. The Huguenot nobles who didn't leave, they speak to Coligny, they beg for Coligny to leave town. But he says, no, to leave now would to show that I do not trust the word of my king. I will stay. Eventually that evening of Saturday the 23rd, at some point, Prince Henry and the Queen Mother Catherine sit down Charles, if you believe this version of the story, and tell him, we planned the murder. You've got to stop telling people you're going to catch them. It's us. And we're going to wipe all the Huguenots out. Here's our plan. If you don't believe that version, Charles already knows, and they've just met simply to go over the plan. And so then early the next morning, there was to be a signal for the people of the town. Remember, the people of the town are now worried. Of Paris, they're worried that the Huguenots will try to take revenge for the shooting of Coligny. And they will arm themselves and wipe out the Roman Catholics. And so the Catholics have been arming. The Catholics are ready. The priests have stirred up the militias. And they're going to ring the bell early at about 4 in the morning. And the militias would take to the street with crosses, white crosses, and white armbands so that everyone would know that they were the Catholic good guys. and murder the Huguenots. But before the signal is actually given, Duke Henry of Guise goes to the hotel of the Admiral. The soldiers left there by the king simply let him in. There are some Swiss guards who put up a brief fight, and they barge into the Admiral's room, who then says, "You should respect my gray hairs." They say, "Are you Admiral Coligny?" He says, "I am." And they stab him to death. He had just finished up prayers with his chaplain, Peter Merlin. Duke Henry of Guise was waiting outside, and they yell down from the window, "The job is done." And he says, "I don't believe you. Throw the body down." And they throw the body lifeless out the window. The Duke of Guise wipes the blood and the dust off of the face, confirms it is indeed the Admiral, has the head cut off and sent to the Queen Mother at the Louvre. And the rest of Coligny's family is attacked inside the hotel. Sometime not long after this, the signal is given, and the massacre in the streets begins. We will look at that more next time. We thank you for watching. We hope that you will come back and watch again with us as we continue our discussion of the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. This has been a Wilden Pulpit Media production.